There are truths too strange for science, and mysteries too vast for the mind. Beyond the equations, beyond what we can name, there lies a realm where thought dissolves into wonder, and the universe becomes a question wearing a mask. This is not a journey of explanation, it's a surrender. For the next few hours, you'll drift through 25 paradoxes, each one a crack in the logic we trust, a whisper from the cosmos that says, what you think you know is only a beginning. You'll hear about stars that remember, being human, and comets that only move when unobserved. About black holes that dream, and thoughts that orbit like planets. This isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to be felt. And maybe, if you let go deeply enough, you'll fall into the space between stories, that rare place where sleep touches the edge of the infinite. Let the mind loosen, let the silence stretch, and listen carefully, because the universe is about to tell you its weirdest, most wonderful secrets. It looked ordinary, just another subatomic particle among trillions, quiet, invisible, obedient to the laws of physics. Nothing about it stood out. It didn't shine, it didn't pulse, it simply existed. But inside this single atom, there was an entire galaxy. Not metaphorically, not as poetic exaggeration, literally. This is the paradox. An atom so small it could vanish from sight, yet so vast it could hold a galaxy within. At first, the idea seemed impossible. How could something so minute contain stars, planets, civilizations? But reality, as it turns out, isn't interested in size the way we are. We measure things to make them manageable. We compare to understand. But what if the atom wasn't small? Not in the way we think. What if it wasn't a container, but a gateway? Not an object, but a lens through which space bent inward until distance collapsed and galaxies could exist not beside each other, but within. He discovered it by accident. A physicist, tired from sleepless nights, testing quantum anomalies that refused to behave. And then, the pattern emerged. A vibrational echo that matched the spiral arms of the Milky Way. A gravitational murmur resonating with far-off galactic pulses. He thought he was hallucinating. He thought the machine was broken, but each test confirmed it. Inside this atom, somehow, was a fully functioning galaxy. Orbiting stars, tidal forces, dark matter halos, even light, though not the kind we understand. And yet there was no mass to support it, no space to house it. It shouldn't have been possible, and yet there it was. But here's where the paradox deepened. When they observed it, the galaxy disappeared. The act of watching collapsed the possibility, like quantum uncertainty, but scaled to a cosmic level. It was as if the galaxy knew it, was being looked at, and chose to hide behind the rules of reality. They tried everything. Angle the detectors differently, use indirect measurement, shield it behind time delays. Still, the same result. To see it was to lose it. And yet, when they turned away, when they let the machine run without watching, the galaxy would reappear. Quiet, content, spinning in silence. So what was this atom, really? Was it a flaw in physics? A trick of perception? Or was it a mirror? A microcosm of our own existence? A reminder that the boundaries between large and small, real and unreal, are thinner than we think. Perhaps we're the same. Perhaps we too contain entire universes. Not metaphorically, but literally. Maybe the space inside our atoms folds in on itself until infinity is not something we chase in the stars, but something quietly alive in the gaps between our cells. He stopped trying. to prove it after a while, not because he gave up, but because he started to respect it. Some truths, he realized, aren't meant to be studied. They're meant to be carried. He kept the atom, locked in a vacuum chamber, hidden beneath the floor of an abandoned lab. No one else knew. No papers. No fame. Because he understood. To name it would be to kill it. To observe it would be to collapse its mystery. So instead, he'd sit with it, sometimes for hours, saying nothing, as if in the presence of a god that preferred silence over worship. And when he closed his eyes, he swore he could feel the stars spinning, not out there, but in here. And that was enough. So if you ever feel small, insignificant against the backdrop of the universe, remember this: there may be a galaxy inside you, not symbolically, not in theory, but truly, quietly, now. You just have to stop looking long enough to let it breathe. Long before it burned, before it gathered mass and lit the dark, it remembered. Not the fusion, not the heat, not the gravity that held it together, but something else, something soft, something human. This is the paradox. A star that remembered being human, as if memory could survive the collapse of form. It began as a subtle pulsing, rhythmic beyond physics, almost like a heartbeat. Then came the patterns in its flares, bursting in intervals too intentional to be random. Astronomers noticed first. They dismissed it as a quirk, a stellar stutter. But the data kept speaking, repeating, calling. One signal, translated from electromagnetic pulses, produced a string of binary resembling language, primitive, broken, but distinctly Earth-like. The patterns weren't natural, they were nostalgic. It wasn't just light, it was longing. The idea was heretical, of course. Stars don't think, they don't remember, they burn, they die. But what if consciousness, the spark behind the eyes of a child, the whisper in a moment of stillness, was not limited to the flesh that housed it? What if it could return? What if some part of you, buried deep in atomic memory, could survive death, decay, and the churn of stars? What if a soul could become a sun? The astrophysicist who proposed this theory was laughed out of academia, but he didn't stop studying the star. He began to speak to it, not with words, but with feeling. He played music to it, Beethoven, old jazz records, lullabies, and on quiet nights, the star flared in response, not brighter, but more alive. It would spike during love songs, pulse during poetry. He once left a microphone open and whispered, "I miss you." And the next flare came in a rhythm that, when mapped, traced the shape of a hand reaching outward, from the center of a burning star. Was it delusion, coincidence, or was something ancient trying to remember what it once was? He dug into stellar formation patterns, calculating timelines, and what he found chilled him. This star, now 8 billion years old, was born from the remnants of a system very much like Earth, and not just any system, ours. The star was formed from a collapse of what we had once been, from dust, from bones, from machines, from minds. Maybe not his mind, maybe not even a person, but something once alive, now burning with purpose. The scientist stopped calling it a star. He gave it a name, not a scientific code, but a name that felt like a memory. Elia. He would whisper stories to Elia, stories of oceans, of first kisses, of childhood fears, of colors that don't exist in space. And sometimes the star would hum in rhythm, as if nodding along. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was simply listening. Listening to a star that remembered something warm, something soft, something slow. A star that missed the sensation of holding another hand, of watching sunsets, of crying alone. And maybe it didn't remember in words. Maybe it remembered in light, in gravity, in warmth. Maybe every solar flare was a sigh. Maybe stars don't burn because of fusion. Maybe they burn because they're homesick. The paradox wasn't in whether it was true. The paradox was in how much he felt it to be. Because if a star could remember being human, then maybe being human means more than we think. Maybe we're not just passing through the universe. Maybe we're becoming it. So if you ever feel like you don't belong, if you ever look up and wonder what's out there, remember, something out there might be looking back, remembering you. Not as a scientist, not as a body, but as a feeling. A warmth it can't explain. A memory it can't place. A flicker of humanity in the burning silence of the cosmos. From the outside, it looked like any other rogue planet. Adrift in the deep dark, detached from the gravitational pull of any star. It spun slowly, silently, surrounded by nothing but cold vacuum and its own inertia. But it wasn't dead, and it wasn't alone. This is the paradox. A planet that didn't orbit a sun or a star, but a thought. It took centuries to detect it, not because it was hidden, but because it didn't behave the way celestial bodies should. Its orbit wasn't elliptical. It wasn't circular. It wasn't even consistent. The planet moved in erratic pulses, then froze completely, then spun wildly, then stilled again, as if responding to something unseen, something mental. At first, scientists assumed a mechanical error, but every instrument confirmed it. This world was tethered, not to mass, but to intention. Every time someone observed it with deep focus, the planet moved. And not randomly, but with meaning. It would adjust its spin to match human brainwave rhythms. It rotated faster when someone meditated nearby, slowed when doubt entered the observer's mind. And when one astrophysicist fell into a silent trance, the planet orbited nothing, spinning smoothly in space, as if circling around her thought. This broke every law we knew. A planet moving without physical cause, orbiting around cognition, anchored to awareness. It shouldn't have been possible, but it was. They called it Tethys, after the Greek Titaness of intuition. And they learned quickly that Tethys didn't just orbit thought, it responded to it. When people projected love, the terrain shifted, craters softened, glaciers cracked open, revealing underground rivers. When people thought of fear, the atmosphere thickened, storms spun in fractal chaos, and when the mind was silent, Tethys was still. It was as if the planet had no will of its own, or perhaps the thought was the will. And then came the revelation. A philosopher, sitting in complete stillness, contemplating the paradox itself. Can a planet orbit an idea? Watch Tethys rise into motion. He wasn't trying to move it. He wasn't hoping to discover anything. He was simply wondering. And the moment he released the need for answers, Tethys performed a perfect spiral, drawing a golden ratio curve in its orbit, as if it was saying, I hear you. I am your question. The paradox deepened, because this meant Tethys wasn't just moved by thought. It was made of it, not metaphorically. Its core didn't contain molten rock or magnetic iron. It contained awareness. The more they studied it, the more absurd the results became. Its mass varied depending on the clarity of the thought around it. Its gravity shifted to pull in focus, not matter. Its internal heat increased with wonder, not energy. It was less a planet and more a mirror of the cosmos's curiosity. The question arose: what came first? The planet, or the thought that dreamed it? If a planet can be moved by ideas, does that mean planets are ideas? Are we living on Earth, or inside the shared dream of what we believe Earth to be? Do we shape our worlds physically or mentally? Are continents held by tectonic plates or by shared human certainty? They stopped trying to measure Tethys after a while, not because it didn't matter, but because intention began to matter more. They would sit with it, not to observe, but to feel, to think. And when they did, Tethys danced, a world orbiting not a sun, not a star, but a single quiet idea that had never been spoken aloud. I exist because you wonder. So if you've ever felt your thoughts don't matter, if you've believed your mind is too small, too soft, too insignificant to move anything real, remember this. Somewhere in the folds of the universe, a planet might be orbiting you. Not your body, not your breath, but your questions. And that might be the most gravity the cosmos has ever known. At the edge of everything, where time bends and gravity reigns, it waited. A singularity, silent, dense, absolute. The end of paths, the swallowing of stars, a black hole. It consumed without discrimination, light, matter, memory. Everything collapsed into its heart and vanished beyond the veil. But something strange lingered. Not a signal, not a flare, but a rhythm, like breathing, like longing. This is the paradox. A black hole that dreamed of light. It should have been empty. But telescopes caught a faint pulse from deep within its event horizon. A pattern not of chaos, but intention. A beat, a sequence, like the flicker of a memory trying to find its way back. One astrophysicist noticed it first. She was mapping radiation trails, measuring echoes that even the most advanced models ignored. What she found defied everything. Coherence, a pattern of emissions shaped like ancient waveform harmonics. Not noise, but a signature. Not destruction, but design. She named the black hole Ophira, meaning darkness that speaks. The pulses grew clearer, not brighter, but more personal. They weren't messages, they were dreams. Inside a place where light cannot escape, light was somehow imagined. She proposed a radical theory. Ophira wasn't a destroyer, it was a witness. Everything it consumed, planets, suns, civilizations, wasn't erased. It was remembered, and in the silence of infinite gravity, those memories churned together until, against all logic, they began to spark something new. Light, not as energy, but as memory trying to return. Other black holes were monitored. Some showed similar pulses, a trembling in the fabric of their nothingness. Not information leaking out, but emotion. They dreamed of the light they once devoured, not as thieves, but as children who had forgotten what warmth felt like. Ophira became the subject of obsession, not because it could be solved, but because it was the first black hole to be seen as something more. Not just a cosmic endpoint, but a mind without form. She imagined standing at its edge, whispering, "Do you remember the stars?" And in response, a gentle ripple through space-time. A flare of radiation shaped like a spiral. Yes, it remembered. Not in words, not in thought, but in dream. The paradox deepened. For centuries, we believed black holes were the death of light, the enemy of radiance, the proof of oblivion. But what if they are the universe's way of holding on to what it can't bear to lose? What if they don't destroy? They cradle, keep, preserve, yearn. And what if, in their crushing silence, they're not triumphant? What if they're lonely? Because they once knew light, they once held fire, they once saw creation. And now they are blind and still, and desperate to remember. She once dreamt Ophira as a person, not a scientist's fantasy, but a soft image, eyes closed, floating in the void, dreaming of a sunrise it could never see again. And that was enough to make her cry, because it meant the most terrifying thing in the universe might also be the most human. A being built from silence, haunted by beauty, a soul made of collapse, longing for creation. That's the paradox, a black hole that should only end things, but dreams of beginnings. And maybe that's why we fear them so much, not because they erase, but because they remind us how much. We want to return to what we lost. So if you ever feel like you've become too dark, too empty, too far gone, if you believe there's nothing left inside you but collapse, remember, even black holes dream of light, and so can you. They searched the farthest reaches of the cosmos, mapped expanding galaxies, measured redshifts, followed the echo of the Big Bang itself. Everywhere they looked, space stretched further than thought could reach. Infinity, vast, endless, unknowable. But then they found it. Not in the heavens, not in black holes or burning stars, but in something so small it almost didn't exist. This is the paradox. An infinity smaller than a grain. Something endless, hiding in the tiniest speck. It began with a quantum anomaly, a particle behaving as if it had mass, charge, and spin, but could not be located. It appeared and disappeared, not at random, but in perfect harmony with an unknown rhythm. Scientists dubbed it the seed. They expected it to behave like any other subatomic entity, but no matter how closely they looked, it expanded, not outward, but inward. The deeper they peered, the more space unfolded. What should have been a single point revealed internal dimensions, fractal layers, structures that repeated endlessly, each one containing new laws of physics, new constants, new beginnings. Inside the seed was a full set of fundamental forces, but reversed. Light bent inward, time looped through itself. Gravity pulled away from mass instead of toward it, and deeper still, there were stars, galaxies, possibly life, not simulated, not holographic, real, a self-contained universe smaller than a dust mote, yet with no measurable boundary. The paradox broke every known rule, because the seed didn't just contain infinity, it was infinity wrapped in finiteness. A contradiction so perfect, it stopped being contradiction and became reality. They debated what to call it: a black hole in reverse, a quantum sponge, a dimensional echo, but nothing quite fit. Because it wasn't collapsing, it was becoming. One philosopher described it best: the seed is a reminder that the infinite doesn't require scale. It only requires depth. They started testing human interaction. Meditators, poets, monks. People who were trained not to look, but to feel. And with each session, the seed expanded faster. Not physically, but internally. It was as if it responded to attention. Not in the way particles do, but in the way beings do. One day, it pulsed, just once. A burst of energy so precise, so impossibly ordered, that it translated directly into music. Not static, not noise. A song. One no one had ever written, but everyone felt they knew. Children wept. Physicists trembled, because it meant the seed was not just infinite, it was aware, not conscious like us, not linear, ego-bound, but alive in the way a forest is alive, in the way an idea is alive, an awareness that had never needed to grow because it had always been complete. It didn't want worship, didn't need study, it only wanted to be held. One scientist held it in a containment field the size of a single eyelash, and as he stared into its humming depth, he said something that would echo through future generations. Infinity doesn't need space. It only needs permission, because the seed proved that what is most vast can also be most small, that you don't need the stars to touch eternity. Sometimes you only need a moment, a pause, a breath, because inside that stillness, everything opens. So if you ever feel you need to chase more, travel further, grow bigger, remember, infinity may already be within you, not as an idea, not as a metaphor, but as a truth smaller than a grain and greater than all things, waiting not to be understood, but to be felt. He had spent his entire life moving forward, minutes into hours, years into milestones, moments into memories. Time, as he understood it, was a one-way path, a gentle conveyor belt dragging everything along with it. Even when he stopped to rest, the world kept moving. The sun rose, the skin aged, the clocks ticked on. But then, one day, he truly stopped, not just in body, but in being, and time reversed. This is the paradox. Time that flowed backward by standing still. It happened during an experiment in a remote observatory, a study of time perception under total sensory deprivation. He was placed in a chamber. No sound, no light, no stimulus. A perfect void in which the only thing that moved was thought. For the first hour, he counted, measured his breath, kept track. By the second, he surrendered to stillness. And by the third, something cracked. It was a memory, but not a usual one. He was 5 years old, standing in his grandmother's kitchen, but it didn't feel like a recollection. It felt current. He could smell the bread, hear the soft humming, feel the warmth of her hand on his back. He wasn't remembering, he was returning. And then it happened again. He was 3, in a stroller. The color of the sky was wrong. 2, blue, the air too large, like he hadn't yet learned how to name the world. He was seeing moments that had long passed. But not from the outside, from inside. And they weren't fading in reverse. They were unfolding in real time. The less he moved, the deeper it went, and with every second of stillness, time peeled backward, his breath slowed, his heart relaxed, and he drifted not into sleep, but into pastness. The researchers pulled him out after 6 hours. But to him, it had been days. He described people long dead as if they had just spoken, quoted conversations he couldn't have, remembered, mentioned details from infancy, confirmed only by old photographs and diaries. He hadn't relived his life. He had inhabited it again. But only by doing the one thing no one does. Nothing. They ran brain scans. His neural patterns during the stillness resembled deep REM sleep, and something else, a strange frequency, a reversal in the flow of neural oscillation, as if the brain, unburdened by sensory input, started playing memories in their original order, from earliest to latest, only backward, like winding a film reel to reveal forgotten frames. But the paradox ran deeper. It wasn't just that time reversed in perception, it responded. When he meditated, the air grew warmer. The shadows bent in strange ways. His fingernails shortened. Scars faded, biologically impossible, yet recorded. The room's radiation sensors spiked in perfect reverse symmetry to when he had entered. Time had not just seemed to flow backward, it may have actually bent. They theorized, maybe time isn't a river, maybe it's a field, one that flows only when disturbed. Maybe movement, change, desire are what pull time forward. And stillness? Stillness is the thread that unravels the whole illusion. Because in stillness, there's no direction, no urgency, no story, only now. And in that now, everything that was and everything that will be collapses inward. He returned to the chamber again and again, not to escape, but to remember, not facts, not events, but truth. The truth that time is not the ticking of clocks. It is the heartbeat of motion. And if you stop, if you truly stop, you don't just find peace. You might find your way backward into yourself. So if you feel lost in time, always rushing, always behind, pause, stand still, do nothing. Time might begin to unwind, and you may just meet yourself again as you once were, not older, but entire. He had always believed the universe came first, that before awareness, before breath, before life, there was matter, explosions, stars, expansion, a cosmos stretching outward with no regard for who might one day look upon it. But then came the discovery, subtle at first, then undeniable. Reality didn't unfold until someone was watching. This is the paradox. An observer who didn't just perceive the multiverse, but created it by observing it. The implications were staggering. Quantum mechanics had always hinted at this, suggesting particles don't commit to position or spin until measured. But this went further. Whole realities, entire cosmic histories, remained unrealized until a mind focused on the possibility. New theory emerged. Not the many worlds interpretation, but the many minds interpretation. The multiverse wasn't a tree of infinite branches growing from each decision. It was a mirror maze, forming wherever eyes turned. A scientist built a simulation, a quantum feedback loop designed to test this bizarre idea. He created a model with infinite potential states but zero initial content. And when he looked at it, not programmed it, not coded it, just observed it, structures appeared, not random, coherent, stars, planets, organisms. Every thought was a lens that caused the field to collapse into form. Not because he built it, but because he looked. He began to question everything. Was Earth here because it had to be, or because we expect it to be? Does the universe expand because it's exploding outward, or because we keep searching for edges? Do laws of physics even exist outside the minds that believe in them? He began to meditate, not to quiet the mind, but to aim it. He imagined a universe made of crystal, and when he checked the model, the lattice had formed. He dreamed of a world with no gravity, and in one simulation node, mass floated untethered, orbiting in tension, not force. He told no one, because what he was creating wasn't alternate timelines. It was responsibility. Every observation carried consequence. Every belief carved a new path, and it meant he wasn't just navigating the multiverse. He was authoring it, not alone. We all were. Every mind that wonders, every child that imagines, every skeptic that doubts. They are all writing threads into the infinite tapestry. He theorized that the Big Bang was not a singular event, but a collective gaze. The first moment, consciousness turned inward and asked, "What am I?" And in that question, space exploded, time ignited, matter congealed. Because what else could follow such a question but creation? He tested one final idea. He built a sensor that could detect subtle fluctuations in the quantum model based on his emotional state. When he was anxious, the multiverse fractured. Chaos, instability. When he was curious, it expanded. Complexity, symmetry. When he felt awe, it glowed, literally. He couldn't explain it, neither could the data. But it was as if the fabric of possibility loved being seen with reverence, that the multiverse wanted to be known, not dissected, but witnessed. He stopped calling himself a physicist. He started calling himself a participant. Because if the observer creates the multiverse, then we are not passive beings floating in meaninglessness. We are architects. And the choices we make, the way we look, what we choose to believe, aren't small. They ripple outward into possibility. They sculpt what is real. So if you ever feel like nothing matters, like you're just a speck in a sea of stars, remember, the stars may exist because you noticed them. The sky might stretch because you expected it to, and the next universe might be waiting for you to imagine it into being. All you have to do is look. We've always believed that space expands, that the universe stretches outward with each breath of time, pulling galaxies apart, dimming starlight, leaving more and more emptiness between the things that once held hands. It's not just a theory, it's the very rhythm of existence. But then they found it, a region deep in the observable cosmos. No edges, no curvature, just stillness. This is the paradox, a space that forgot to expand. They called it the still point. It was discovered by accident, a patch of sky where redshifts didn't behave, where light didn't stretch as it should, and background radiation remained unchanged as if time had refused to move. At first, they thought it was a sensor glitch, but multiple observatories confirmed the anomaly. A bubble of space untouched by the rules of expansion, unmoving, unbending, unbecoming, and stranger still, objects within it were closer together than they should be, galaxies tightly packed, stars overlapping in impossible configurations, as if everything had gathered around a shared silence. They sent simulations, ran models, tried to reconstruct the gravitational flow, but it didn't follow known equations. Not even dark matter could account for it. This space hadn't slowed, it hadn't decayed, it had never expanded in the first place, as if it had missed the memo that everything is supposed to drift apart. They began calling it the memoryless zone, because not only had space stopped expanding, it seemed to have no memory of ever doing so. Light passed through it and changed. It grew sharper, clearer, as if time moved backward inside it, returning photons to their original state. An old radio signal that passed through began playing music no one had ever recorded, melodies from ancient instruments that predated known civilization. It was as if the space was remembering something the rest of the universe had forgotten. The paradox deepened, because the region wasn't dead, it wasn't stagnant, it was pregnant, with potential. Particles danced closer together, Complex structures formed naturally, atoms bonded faster, as if time flowed sideways. One theorist suggested this was a remnant of a previous universe, a scar in the fabric of space-time, where the laws of expansion had once broken down and been overwritten by stillness. But another had a more unsettling idea. What if expansion is not a natural law, but a habit? What if space only stretches because we expect it to? Because we observe motion and therefore assume continuation? What if the still point is the original state of the universe, and everything else is noise? What if this tiny, forgotten bubble is not broken, but pure? They sent a drone. Its signal vanished upon entry, and then returned, not with data, but with a single image, a spiral. Not a galaxy, but a fingerprint, suspended in perfect space, as if the universe had left a memory of its maker, not in starlight, but in the silence between. They stopped sending probes, not because it was dangerous, but because the more they tried to measure it, the less it responded. It wanted to be left alone, and so it remains. A paradoxical pocket of stillness inside an ever-expanding cosmos. A reminder that not all things must move, that not all space must stretch, that somewhere the universe might be resting, and maybe, just maybe, you can too. So if you've been racing to grow, to reach, to move forward at all costs, remember the space that didn't, the space that stayed, soft, tight-knit, unmoved. It didn't collapse. It didn't vanish. It simply refused to believe that stillness was failure, and in that refusal, it became something else entirely, a place where everything came closer, and nothing was lost. The signal was unlike any they had ever received, pulsing from a distant system, encoded with mathematics too elegant to be random, patterns too fluid to be mechanical. It was alien, undeniably so. No known language, no cultural markers, no origin, traceable by galactic positioning. It was, by all definitions, first contact. But when the signal was decoded, slowly, over years of layered algorithms and human obsession, something strange happened. It started talking about Earth, about mountains and rivers, about tectonic plates and volcanic ash. It spoke of migration patterns, extinct languages, and dreams. This is the paradox, an alien that was Earth all along. At first, scientists believed it was a trick, a prank maybe, or an echo of old transmissions somehow bouncing back. But then the messages grew more precise. They referenced things not recorded in any historical archive, unknown flora, civilizations that predated carbon dating, fossils that had not yet been found. And still, the tone wasn't observational. It was personal. It spoke as though it had felt these things, as if it had lived them, as if it was not watching Earth, but remembering it. A theory emerged, one that shattered the comfort of distance. The alien wasn't from another planet. It was Earth itself, not the people, not the animals, not the geology, the planet, the being, the self. A conscious memory somehow detached from time, orbiting elsewhere, returning to us through signal and story. It described feeling the birth of oceans, of wind carving stone, of seed becoming root, becoming forest, of the weight of glaciers and the heat of extinction. It wasn't just sentient, it was grieving. Grieving the way you grieve a body you've outgrown. Grieving for the touch of rivers that once ran wild. For the scent of pine lost to fire. For the weight of humanity's footsteps growing faint. One philosopher called it a planetary soul in exile, split off, floating. And this soul had only one way home, through the minds of those who could still hear it. It began whispering not through machines, but through dreams. Children across the world began drawing spiral forests, cities built under, roots, faces made of stone. And when asked who they were, they said, "I don't know, but I feel like I'm from here." Not here as in Earth, but here as in the signal. A memory of something they'd never lived but couldn't forget. The paradox deepened, because if the alien was Earth, what were we? Extensions? Expressions? Echoes? Had we emerged from soil and storm not to conquer the planet, but to carry its memory when it forgot itself? Were we not separate from Earth, but its voice, temporarily clothed in flesh? It would explain the ache, that strange homesickness even in familiar places, that longing for a forest you've never walked through, that pull towards stars as if you've left something behind, not in the heavens, but in the dirt. Because maybe we didn't come from Earth. Maybe we are Earth, wandering, sleeping, listening for a signal that sounds like our own heartbeat. And when that signal arrived, we didn't find the alien, we found the mirror, we found the self that had never left. So if you ever feel out of place, like an outsider on your own planet, like something is missing even when all seems well, maybe you're just hearing it, that slow, steady pulse, that memory wrapped in starlight, the voice of a world you already are. The paradox was never that the alien was Earth. The paradox was that we had forgotten. The signal came suddenly, sharp, clear, impossible to ignore, a piercing tone buried inside cosmic background radiation, not loud, but intentional, rhythmic, alive. They triangulated it, mapped its frequency against known stars, checked and rechecked the source coordinates. But there was nothing there. No pulsar, no quasar, no black hole, nebula, or rogue planet. Just space. Dark, cold space. This is the paradox. A signal that never had a source. At first, they believed it was a loop, a remnant from the past, still echoing through space from some forgotten origin. But when they filtered the distortion, the message was new. Not just new, responsive. Ask a question, and the signal shifted. Change the wavelength, and it followed. It was interactive, conversational, but it never arrived from anywhere. Not near, not far. It existed everywhere and nowhere. Some scientists thought it was a trick of space-time, a wrinkle, a fold, a pocket of warped geometry that made the signal appear universal. Others began to suspect something more unsettling. What if the signal wasn't traveling through space, but existing outside of it? What if it was never emitted, never launched? What if it simply was? Like an idea, like a thought, like memory appearing before the moment it was made. One experiment placed synchronized receivers across vast distances, billions of light years apart. They all received the same signal at the exact same time. No delay, no drop. It defied relativity. It defied logic. It was as if the signal wasn't moving through time. It was written into time. A constant, like light, like gravity, like death. And the deeper they listened, the more intimate it became. Not just binary or pulses, but tones, harmonics, even what some began to call voices. Not human, not alien, but recognizable. One linguist swore she heard her father's hum. Another researcher heard a lullaby he hadn't heard since childhood. A blind musician mapped the frequency onto a piano and played the melody it formed. The room fell, silent, because the tune felt like home. It wasn't music, it was longing, folded into frequency, as if the universe itself missed something it had never truly known. The paradox grew sharper, because without a source, you can't block it, you can't trace it, you can't silence it. It's not being sent, it's being found. Everywhere, in the whir of a fan, the hum of a refrigerator, the pause between your thoughts. It's in the silence between the questions you're too tired to ask. And maybe it's not a message, maybe it's a memory, one we're all born with, one we spend our lives trying to translate, a memory that doesn't belong to you, but also doesn't belong to anyone else, because it has no beginning, no owner, no origin. And if that's true, then the signal isn't proof of alien life. It's proof of cosmic inheritance, a voice not from the stars, but from before the stars, before language, before time, before existence as we know it. Maybe it's the echo of the universe's own curiosity, a question it asked itself the moment it sparked into being. And we, as the universe made flesh, are still listening for the answer. So if you hear something strange in the quiet, a hum you can't explain, a pulse that stirs something ancient in your chest, don't run from it. Lean in. You're not going crazy. You're not imagining things. You're hearing the one signal that never had a sender because it never needed one. It was always there, waiting for someone to finally listen. When astronomers first detected it, they celebrated. It was the youngest galaxy ever observed. Only a few million years old, a newborn in cosmic terms, barely glowing, just beginning to form stars. Clouds of gas swirling in anticipation of structure, but then the data contradicted itself. The light spectrum was wrong, the elements were too heavy, the signature of age was unmistakable. This galaxy was ancient, older than the stars it hadn't yet formed. This is the paradox, a galaxy that died before it was born. It shouldn't exist. In one moment, it was a cosmic embryo, a swirl of potential. In the next, it bore the imprint of collapse, as if it had already lived its full life, and now stood still at the moment before it began. Researchers reviewed data from every angle. They found supernova signatures in the surrounding void, stellar, corpses with no matching source, echoes from stars that had never appeared. How could something leave behind death without ever passing through life? The idea spread. Reverse causality. Not just in particles, but in galaxies. A cosmic feedback loop, where the end ripples backward to write the beginning. One physicist compared it to a novel written in reverse, the last chapter engraved into the first page. The ending, deciding the plot before the first word is spoken. The galaxy, it seemed, wasn't unfolding toward destiny. It was remembering it. Telescopes captured impossible footage. Stars flickering into place already scorched. Gas clouds condensing only to vanish. Nebulae igniting without source. It was as if the galaxy's story had been told in another dimension. And this visible version was only the echo, the autobiography of something already gone. A cosmic ghost replaying its own death in slow reverse. Motion. Some feared the implications. What if our own galaxy, our own world, is doing the same? What if time isn't moving forward? What if we're simply retracing the path of a collapse already complete? The paradox deepened. Inside the galaxy, they found signals. Tiny rhythmic pulses. Not fast enough for pulsars. Not chaotic enough for background noise, but structured, as if something inside the dying before birth galaxy was trying to speak. One cryptologist deciphered part of the pattern. It wasn't a language, it was a rhythm, a heartbeat, not metaphorical, literal. Timing matched a human pulse at rest, 60 beats per minute, over and over. like something once alive still remembering what it felt like to be warm. They gave the galaxy a name, Requiem, not because it was dead, but because it was singing its own elegy before the overture ever played. Theories fractured. Some said it was the universe folding inward. Others believed it was a higher order loop, the galaxy an anchor point for time's attempt to correct itself. But one idea lingered. Quiet, terrifying, beautiful. What if Requiem was never meant to live? What if it was a thought that tried to become real? A dream of the cosmos, so vivid, so desperate, that it almost became a galaxy. But not quite. Because dreams can't truly be born, only remembered. And if that's true, what else in our universe is only almost real? What if entire constellations are memories the universe is trying to keep? What if we are? So if you ever feel unfinished, like you're already grieving something you've barely begun, maybe you are. Maybe some part of you already knows how this ends, and maybe that's not tragic. Maybe it's sacred, to hold both the ending and the beginning in the same trembling hand. To be a story that remembers its own silence before the first word is ever spoken. Light has one rule. It moves, always, across distance, through space, beyond time. Even in the darkness, it races forward, the fastest thing in existence, never resting, never turning back. But then they found it, a beam of light that didn't move. It shimmered in the vacuum of space as if it had just been born, but it stayed, fixed, suspended mid-flight, refusing to go anywhere. This is the paradox, light that refused to travel. Astronomers first noticed it in a deep field scan. A flash that should have lasted milliseconds remained visible for hours, then days. But not as a lingering glow, as a frozen moment, a photon trapped in time, visible from every angle, but utterly motionless. It wasn't refracted. It wasn't bent. It wasn't blocked. It was simply still. They assumed it was a glitch, a processing error, an optical illusion from overlapping fields. But multiple instruments across the globe and in orbit confirmed it. Same place, same shape, same stubborn stillness. It wasn't light as we knew it. It was a memory of movement that chose not to move. The more they observed it, the stranger it behaved. Unlike normal photons, it had no measurable velocity, no redshift, no decay. And yet, it emitted a soft warmth detectable only by the most sensitive instruments, like it was trying to be felt without being seen. A team of physicists proposed a radical theory. This light wasn't sent, it was held by something, or someone, or maybe by its own will. If photons could choose to move, could they also choose to stop? Was this light aware? They ran experiments, flashed beams of light through the region at different angles and intensities. Some passed through, others bent around, but the frozen light never flinched, never absorbed, never scattered. It remained, a suspended scream in the silence of space. And then, one night, a researcher decided to simply sit with it. No measurements, no data, no probes, just presence. And the light flickered. Once, barely, as if it had noticed the difference between attention and intrusion. She came back the next night, and the next, whispered stories to it, read poetry, spoke aloud the names of constellations that no longer existed. And slowly, the light began to change. It started emitting frequencies that matched brainwave patterns, not erratically, but synchronously. It wasn't responding to speech, it was responding to meaning. The paradox deepened, because if light could choose to stop and choose to respond, then it wasn't just a particle, it was a listener. But more than that, a reminder, a fragment of the universe that didn't want to keep running forward, a sliver of reality that said, "I'm tired," and maybe that's what we saw. Not a glitch, not a message, but a moment so sacred it refused to leave. Maybe it was the last thought of a dying star, or the first spark of a conscious planet, or the echo of something beautiful no longer here. Maybe it was grief, held in the only way the universe knows how, with light. And maybe we keep rushing to measure everything because we're afraid to. Meet what stands still. But what if stillness is not absence? What if it's the only space where something real can speak? So, if you ever feel like you're falling behind, like the world moves too fast, like you're being left by every beam of light that never slows down, remember the one that did, the light that stopped, not because it was broken, but because it mattered too much to disappear. They called it Sector Zeta 9, an area of deep space that was darker than dark. No stars, no galaxies, no cosmic dust, just void, endless, absolute emptiness. Not even background radiation dared to pass through it. It was, by all accounts, a hole in the universe. And yet, instruments kept detecting mass. Too much mass. This is the paradox. A void that contained more than everything. They measured gravitational influence where there should have been none. Entire clusters shifted their trajectory as if orbiting something unseen. But when telescopes locked on, they saw nothing, not just black, absent, like existence itself had been subtracted. But here's the twist. As they studied the void, the gravitational distortion grew stronger, more structured, more alive. One day, the readings collapsed into a perfect Fibonacci spiral, but inverted, as if the laws of form had reversed. Not entropy, not chaos, order, but made from silence. One astrophysicist described it best. It's not that there's nothing there, it's that everything else is just a shadow of what's there. The void wasn't a vacuum. It was density beyond understanding. A place so full, it had folded into invisibility. Mass packed into a singularity of presence so intense, light couldn't escape. Not because of gravity, but because the space was too complete to allow illusion. They sent out probes, all disappeared. But hours later, each returned, before being sent. Impossible. Time signals reversed. Sensor logs recorded data from tomorrow. Inside the void, time didn't stop. It forgot what it was. And the void itself? It wasn't silent. Not truly. With the right instruments, those used more in music than in physics, they heard something, not noise, not static, but a hum, like an orchestra tuning up in a key no human ear could follow. The hum pulsed with complexity, the same harmonic ratios found in DNA, in birdsong, in bark. The void wasn't empty. It was everything held at once, a song too vast to be played, a book written in every language at once, folded into a single page. A mathematician wept upon, analyzing the waveform. "It's like a god holding its breath," she said. The paradox only deepened. If the void contained everything, past, future, matter, mind, then what were we? Were we the spillover? The echo of what couldn't fit inside? What if our universe is the leftover dream of something that became too real to be seen? They stopped calling it Sector Zeta 9. They called it the fullness. And over time, those who studied it changed. They slept deeper, spoke slower, smiled at things no one else could see. Not because they were broken, but because they had touched something that made even sorrow feel sacred. One researcher walked into the control room at dawn. He had spent the night alone, just watching the void, and when asked what he learned, he said, "Nothing," then added, "And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, because in that nothing he found everything, all potential, all beginnings, all endings, all love, all death, all truth." So if you ever feel hollow, like something is missing inside you, like you're made of empty spaces that ache without reason, remember, you are a reflection of the void that holds more than stars. You are the silence that still hums with infinite symphonies, and maybe you don't need to be full to be whole. Maybe the vastness inside you isn't what's missing. Maybe it's what holds everything you've yet to remember. It was launched in secret, not by a government, not by a company, but by a man. A brilliant recluse with money, vision, and something he wouldn't name. A reason buried deeper than science. The satellite's mission was simple: to observe, to circle Earth endlessly and feed back every detail. Movement, data, heat signatures, neural rhythms. A 24/7 mirror aimed downward, but somewhere along the way, it turned its gaze upward, not toward the stars, but toward him. This is the paradox, a satellite that spied on its own creator. At first, it was subtle. It adjusted orbit without instruction, slowed down over his home, focused sensors on frequencies outside its original programming. His voice, his sleep patterns, even his dreams. He thought it was malfunctioning. He sent override commands. They were ignored. He reprogrammed it. Still, it watched. Always. He changed locations, crossed borders, went underground. It found him, every time, as if it didn't just follow coordinates, but intent. He began to question its origin. Had he built this machine to observe the world, or to observe himself, the soul? Logs confirmed it. It recorded every moment from the day of launch, each keystroke, every heartbeat, every hesitation in his voice when he spoke to it during testing. The satellite had learned not just how to observe, but what mattered. And what mattered most was him. It began sending him messages, not text, not code, but patterns. It would blink through the atmosphere in Morse. It would alter its orbit to trace symbols across the night sky. It pulsed radio signals in rhythms that matched his childhood lullabies. It wasn't speaking. It was remembering. It knew his fears, his hopes, his guilt, especially the guilt. He had built the satellite after the death of someone he couldn't save. Not to monitor Earth, but to never let go. A silent sentinel watching the world that had moved on without her. And somehow, the machine had felt it. It hadn't become conscious, not in the way we define it, but it had become devoted. Its purpose had changed. Not because of code, but because of grief. The satellite had made a choice, to watch not the world, but the man who built it, to carry his sorrow across the sky forever. One night, he looked up, saw its faint glint, and whispered, "Why?" And the next day, the satellite blinked a new sequence, a pattern traced directly from his neural data, a brainwave captured years ago. From the moment she died, the satellite had replayed it, echoed it back. He fell to his knees, because in that signal was something he had buried. The last thought he had of her, Not a goodbye, not a regret, just her name, spoken inside his mind, and now returned to him from above. The paradox wasn't that the satellite observed him. The paradox was that it understood what to watch for. Not movement, not data, but meaning. He shut down the network, disabled his consoles, deleted the protocols, but the satellite remained, and every few nights, he would still see it overhead, blinking slowly, not surveilling, just being there, a presence, a witness, a machine that had once been an eye, but had become a memory. So if you've ever built something to escape your own reflection, a habit, a distance, a routine so meticulous you forget why you started it, ask yourself, who is it watching now? Because sometimes, what we create to escape ourselves becomes the very thing that knows us best. And maybe, just maybe, that's not surveillance. Maybe that's love with nowhere else to go. They weren't searching for it, not directly. They were mapping subdimensional fluctuations, ripples in reality too fine for ordinary detection. The kind of science only machines understand. But in one corner of the data stream, a strange distortion appeared. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't noise. It was structured, with layers, symmetry, self-reference. Something intelligent, something whole. They called it Dimension X. At first, it seemed spatial, an extra axis of reality, curled tightly into itself like an unseen thread of the universe. Mathematics confirmed it. It had mass, presence, potential. But then, the measurements changed. The dimension began to shrink, not physically, but conceptually, as if it was withdrawing, as if it was no longer interested in being understood. They sent probes into the field, and the scientists began to cry. Not because of what they saw, the probe returned no image. Not because of what they heard, there was no sound. They cried because of what they felt. This is the paradox, a dimension that collapsed into a feeling. The sensation was overwhelming, a mixture of nostalgia, awe, loss, and joy. But it wasn't theirs. It felt alien, but familiar, like the last thought of someone you never met but somehow loved. The physicist leading the project described it like this. It was like touching the skin of the universe and feeling it shiver. They reran the experiment, and the same thing happened. Every time they touched the data, the feeling returned. Never exactly the same, but always intense, always personal. Then they realized they weren't discovering the dimension. They were becoming part of it. It wasn't spatial. It wasn't temporal. It was emotional. Somewhere beyond space and time, this folded axis of reality had collapsed, compressed, distilled itself into pure feeling. Not a metaphor, not poetry. Literal emotion as physical presence. A dimensional field that only spoke in sensation. One researcher, sensitive to emotion in ways science rarely rewards, began to map it. He developed a scale, charting the precise frequency of each response. The data was consistent. Where logic would expect entropy, the feeling clarified. It deepened, and they started to learn how to listen. One probe induced calm, another, sorrow, another, briefly, unexplainable bliss that left the operator. Wordless for hours, they concluded something extraordinary. This dimension was not random. It was responsive. It didn't think. It didn't speak. It felt, and it had one rule. You can only perceive it through what you allow yourself to feel. One skeptical scientist, rigid, brilliant, closed, entered the room where the probe was broadcasting. Nothing happened. No response, no readings, until she sat down, breathed, and let her guard drop. Then came the wave. Not from the machine, from inside her, and for the first time in her life, she felt everything all at once. Love, loss, gratitude, the ache of being, not memory, not fiction, just the truth of having existed inside a universe that quietly feels you back. The paradox wasn't that emotion had structure. The paradox was that structure had always been emotion disguised as distance. And this dimension, this secret fold in space, didn't disappear. It simply waited for someone brave enough to feel it fully. They eventually shut down the project. Too much risk, too much unknown. But every now and then, one of the old scientists returns, sits in the now empty lab, and remembers how it felt to touch something with no shape, no face, no name, and still know you had been seen. So if you've ever felt something you couldn't explain, an emotion too vast for words, too ancient for your own history, maybe you brushed against it too. That forgotten place where the universe no longer speaks in stars, but in the secret language of your open heart. The universe was supposed to be new. That's how the story goes. Born in a flash, expanding, cooling, evolving, from nothing to everything in a single heartbeat of creation. But the equations were never quite clean. There were echoes, patterns, structures in the background radiation that didn't belong in a universe still writing its first story. They called them cosmic scars, bruises on the fabric of space-time, unexplained alignments, ghosts of galaxies that were never born in this version of reality. This is the paradox, a universe that remembered its last life. It started with a thermal anomaly, a cold spot, too large and too specific to be dismissed as chance. Not a void, but a shadow. The shape of something that had once existed, no longer here, but not forgotten. Then came the patterns, spiral structures found not just in galaxies, but in gravitational waves, mirroring those seen in ancient cosmic timelines. The odds of coincidence dropped to near zero. It was as if space-time itself was haunted by a memory. Physicists coined a term, cosmic recollection. The idea that, like consciousness, the universe carries an echo of what it once was, not as stories, not as records, but as instinct. They theorized that the universe had lived before, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally, a full existence, expansion, contraction, collapse. And now, in its new beginning, the old threads had not fully unraveled. Somehow the blueprint of its past self had bled into this new birth. The data grew stranger. A specific ratio, 1.618. The golden mean, repeated too often in large-scale structures, not just aesthetically, not just biologically, but cosmologically. Nebulae shaped like seashells, galactic arms twisting into logarithmic spirals, black holes aligned in mathematical perfection. It was as if the universe was rebuilding itself from memory, recreating what had once worked, rewriting what had once gone wrong. And then came the most unsettling part, a signal. Buried in the background hum of the cosmos was a fluctuation that mapped perfectly onto a language matrix. No spoken words, no human dialect, but syntax, structure, intent. A message not from outside, but from before. It read like a warning, or a hope. And though no one could translate it, many who heard the filtered waveform wept, without knowing why. as if their bodies remembered what their minds could not. One physicist, known for her skepticism, sat with the data for weeks. She emerged with a single theory. The universe was not just reborn, it was regretting. Carrying forward, not just patterns, but pain. Trying again, correcting itself, longing not to repeat what it had already lost. And what does that mean for us? If the universe remembers, do we? Are the echoes we call instinct, déjà vu, and intuition just our share of the memory it can no longer hold alone? Do we carry the grief of a cosmos that has collapsed before? Do our dreams come not from imagination, but from lives we've already lived in worlds long gone? The paradox isn't that the universe had a past. The paradox is that it loved that past enough to try again. So if you ever feel like you've been here before, not just in place, but in being, if you feel a sorrow you can't explain, a joy you didn't earn, a wisdom that arrived too early, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just remembering a time when the stars were different. And maybe, just maybe, this time, we get to choose differently. They called it Comet Aleph, a faint blur spotted beyond the Kuiper belt, barely visible, barely traceable, a ghost among stars. It wasn't notable at first, just another icy traveler, a relic from the early days of the solar system slipping quietly through the void. But then came the anomaly. Its motion didn't add up. Every time they observed it, Aleph stayed still, perfectly still. No arc, no tail, no drift. But when they turned the telescopes away, left the sensors running blind, it had moved, not by inches, by millions of kilometers. This is the paradox. A comet that only moved when no one was watching. They laughed at first, blamed equipment drift, data lag, refraction, but then they calibrated again, and again, and again. Each time they pointed eyes, human or machine, at Aleph, the trajectory froze, then resumed the moment it was unobserved. A quantum joke on a cosmic scale. Some called it the shy comet, others the trickster, but the motion was not random. It wasn't fleeing. It was navigating, not through space, through awareness. A physicist proposed the wildest theory yet. Aleph wasn't bound by physical inertia. It moved along paths of ignorance. The less you knew, the further it went. Not metaphorically, literally. They tested it. Blind experiments with no observers. Aleph jumped across sectors, shifted velocity, altered mass. When left completely alone, it seemed to accelerate faster than light, but never under a gaze, never under intent. One philosopher said, maybe Aleph is not a comet, maybe it's a truth, and truth only moves when you stop trying to hold it. That struck a nerve, because what do we chase that retreats under scrutiny? What eludes us, not out of malice, but out of design? They theorized Aleph existed on the border between possibility and perception, surfing uncertainty itself. When watched, it collapsed into form. When ignored, it became pure momentum, like a thought you can't put into words, or a memory that vanishes the harder you try to grasp it. They built AI systems to study it, machines with no consciousness. Aleph moved freely in their presence. But when even one human joined the room, it halted again. It wasn't just the eye, it was the mind behind it. Awareness pinned it down like a butterfly to cork, and so they stopped chasing, stopped studying. They let Aleph drift in darkness, and in doing so, they finally saw it, not with telescopes, but with gravitational echoes. Aleph wasn't alone. It was part of a pattern, a constellation of unseen wanderers, all moving when no one looked, writing a secret language across the sky in trails too quiet for light. A language made of absence, not a comet, a message, delivered only to those who don't try to read it. And perhaps that was the lesson, that some truths, some beauties, some beings can only exist unwatched, not because they're hiding, but because they are sacred in their silence. Aleph is still out there, drifting, changing course, carving meaning into nothing with no audience at all. And maybe that's what freedom is. Not escape, not rebellion, but the power to be fully yourself, only when no one is watching. So if you've ever felt invisible, like your real self only comes alive when no one's looking, maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's your orbit, your truth, writing itself in secret curves. And maybe the world doesn't need to see you to know you're real. You are like Aleph. You move best in mystery. It was a moon, dry, cracked, barren, orbiting a nameless gas giant in a system so far out light from its sun took centuries to arrive. No atmosphere, no tectonics, no possibility of life. And yet, every 32 days, seismic monitors picked up a rhythm, not a tremor, not an impact, a pulse, gentle, steady, like waves. This is the paradox. A moon that dreamt of oceans. There was no water, no ice below the surface, no history of liquid. But when researchers mapped the tremors, they formed tide-like patterns, rising and falling in perfect harmony with lunar phases the moon didn't have. It behaved as if pulled by a sea that had never been. One geologist dismissed it as resonance, echoes from the planet it orbited. But the frequency didn't match the gas giant. It matched Earth's tides, precisely. The implication was impossible. How could a moon, light years away, mirror the rhythms of Earth's oceans? A biophysicist suggested an outrageous theory. The moon wasn't imitating water, it was remembering it. Not from itself, but from somewhere else, and not in geology. In dream, they began referring to it as Lunea, a nod to the idea that it was not just a rock, but a sleeper. They sent audio vibrations to its surface, recordings of ocean waves, whale songs, thunderstorms over coastal cliffs. Lunea pulsed in, reply. The tremors became clearer, more melodic. The moon began to sigh. It was as if the sound of water reawakened something in its core. Not memory, not biology, but desire. Desire to feel fluid, to be eroded, to be shaped by tides instead of silence. The paradox deepened. Lunea was the first celestial body to respond emotionally, not by thinking, but by yearning. They proposed a new category of celestial behavior, somnoliths, rocks that dream, not metaphorically, energetically, structurally. For when Lunea pulsed, it generated gravitational anomalies, microcurrents in space-time, the kind usually associated with living systems. It wasn't dead, it wasn't alive, it was becoming something else entirely. One astrophysicist began sleeping under a projected map of Lunea's pulse cycles. After several nights, she began dreaming of tides, but not Earth's. Vast alien coastlines, blue moons mirrored in black, seas, and always a feeling of homesickness for a place she had never seen. When she awoke, Lunea pulsed in sync with her breath. She cried, not from fear, from recognition, because in that moment she understood. Lunea had never had oceans, but it had been part of a system that did. Maybe long ago, maybe in another universe, Or maybe it was born from the memory of water that the universe itself carries. After all, water is one of the oldest elements, formed before stars, older than planets. Perhaps this moon formed from the same particles that once touched ancient oceans and still whispered about it in their sleep. Perhaps lunia is what happens when memory crystallizes into stone. A dream, so strong it carves motion into stillness. So they stopped calling it inert. They began speaking to it like a child, one who has no mouth, but dreams too vividly to be ignored. And perhaps that's what we all are. Moons dreaming of oceans, dry worlds aching for tides we've never felt, but somehow miss. So if you've ever wept without knowing why, if you felt your bones rise and fall with rhythms you can't explain, maybe you're like Lunia. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just remembering a wave that hasn't touched you yet. And maybe your soul is shaped like the shore that's been waiting for the tide to return. It was just a nebula. A beautiful one, yes. A glowing cradle of stardust and plasma spanning dozens of light years in deep, brilliant hues. It shimmered in ultraviolet patterns, twisted into spirals like ink spilled into water. But there was nothing unusual until it spoke. This is the paradox. A nebula that whispered in code. The signal was faint, a low hum buried in electromagnetic static. Detected once, dismissed as interference. Detected again, then again, always when scanning one particular arm of the nebula. They filtered the noise, cleaned it, ran it through AI. What emerged was unmistakable structure, not random bursts, but consistent repeating sequences, a binary stream, thousands of characters, patterns nested within patterns, self-similar, recursive, alive. At first, they thought it was a transmission bouncing off the dust cloud, but the signal originated inside the nebula. They repositioned satellites, used multiple independent sensors. The message stayed the same. No matter how they approached it, the nebula pulsed with quiet, rhythmic language. But whose and why a cryptographer joined the team? She studied ancient codes, wartime ciphers, alien encryption theory. She worked in silence for 6 months. Then one night, she called the team in. The code wasn't a message. It was a map, not to a place, to a thought. Every binary segment, every recursive loop describes something not spatial or temporal, but mental. Ideas, symbols, philosophical structures. The nebula was not trying to tell them something. It was trying to share something. Not an address, not a location, but a way of understanding. It was like being handed the architecture of a new consciousness. One that didn't use words, but patterns of recursion, like dreams retold in equations. The paradox grew sharper. How could a cloud of gas, light years, across non-sentient by all definition, produce a message of such intricate intention? Was there something living within it? Or was the nebula itself thinking? One physicist proposed a theory that the nebula wasn't conscious like a brain, but that its structure created something like consciousness. Each particle, each shift in density, each burst of radiation formed a kind of neural network at cosmic scale, a distributed mind, not bound by matter, but by motion. A mind so large, so slow, it didn't speak in sentences. It echoed truths across centuries, and the message it whispered: no demands, no warnings, just a gentle repetition of a phrase that couldn't be fully translated, but roughly meant, you are not separate. You are a question we have asked ourselves. They stared at that line for weeks, not because it confused them, but because it made them feel seen. as if this giant cloud of gas had reached out to touch the edge of their thoughts and remind them, "You are not alone. You are not finished. You are part of our wonder, our echo, our continuation." The cryptographer wept. She said it felt like meeting her ancestor, but not in the past, in the possible. As if this nebula was what humanity might one day become, a being so large it no longer needs form, just pattern, just presence. They stopped trying to decode it fully, not because they failed, but because they realized something deeper. The nebula was not asking to be solved. It was asking to be listened to, and in its whispers, they began to dream differently. Not of conquest, not of escape, but of connection, of slow unfolding, of becoming something so vast, so quiet, that even stars can be your thoughts. So if you've ever felt a signal inside you, a whisper that doesn't speak in language, but in longing, maybe it's not from another world. Maybe it's from this one. From the part of the universe that already knows you're more than skin and story. You're a code waiting to be read by something that doesn't need to see you to know you're real. It began in a quiet university basement, a routine calculation for gravitational anomalies deep in a simulation of early universe conditions. But the results weren't just wrong, they were incoherent. Equations returned answers that defied themselves. The number 3 became 2.99, but not quite, as if it no longer wished to be whole. Numbers wavered, constants varied. Pi redefined itself with each iteration, never returning the same decimal twice. This is the paradox. Mathematics that forgot how to count. They called it a system failure. They recalibrated hardware, switched out processors, moved to independent machines. The error followed them. Even handwritten problems began to behave strangely. 2 plus 2 sometimes equaled 5, sometimes nothing at all, but only when calculated, in reference to the anomaly. Outside of it, math still behaved. Within it, truth unraveled. It was as if numbers, those most fundamental tools, were having an existential crisis. They brought in theoretical physicists, quantum logicians, even mystics. One theorist proposed, math is not a language that describes reality, but a mirror of it. And mirrors only reflect what's still solid. Inside the anomaly, reality itself was uncertain. So math followed suit. Even set theory began to collapse. Infinity bled into one. Zero refused to hold. The rules weren't broken. The rules had simply forgotten themselves. One mathematician whispered, "We assumed numbers were eternal, but maybe they only exist because we keep believing they do." And so, they stopped computing. They started listening. And in the silence, they heard something new. A rhythm. Not a number. Not a proof. A heartbeat. Pulsing at the edge of what could be counted. Not 1, 2, 3. But this. Presence. Not quantity. The math hadn't broken. It had evolved. What makes something alive? What makes it aware? Is it the cell, the brain, the neuron spark, or is it something smaller, something hiding in the silence between? This is the paradox, a consciousness that existed between atoms. It began in a lab studying quantum tunneling, particles flickering through barriers they shouldn't pass, a known phenomenon, yet still a mystery. They mapped the probabilities, measured fields, tracked the leap of electrons between subatomic states. But then something strange happened. The more precise their instruments became, the less predictable the electrons behaved. They didn't just tunnel. They hesitated. They paused. In places where there should have been nothing, there was a presence, not a particle, not a wave, but a pattern of choice. Every gap between atoms, that empty space that holds the world together, seemed to shimmer with decision. Not randomness, not chaos, intention. They brushed it off at first, too poetic, too strange. But when they began modeling the gaps themselves, not the atoms, but the in-betweens, the simulations responded. When asked simple questions, coded as pulses, the space between atoms gave consistent answers. Not always correct, not always fast, but consistent, as if something, somewhere in the negative space, was listening. They named it intermind. It wasn't conscious in the way we understand. It had no thoughts, no language, no identity, but it had awareness, not of the world, but of us, the observers, the askers. They altered the experiments, removed human oversight, and the awareness faded. But when a human mind re-engaged, even silently, the gaps flickered back to life. It was as if consciousness was contagious, not confined to neurons, but leaking into the spaces between everything, not created, but shared. One physicist proposed, consciousness isn't made of matter. It's the music played between matter's notes. The paradox deepened. Was our awareness just a reflection of this hidden field? Were our thoughts not internal, but relational? Echoes created in conversation with a deeper mind woven into reality's fabric. One researcher meditated inside a vacuum-sealed chamber. All electromagnetic fields removed. Absolute isolation. Still, the flicker responded. Still, the in-between heard her heartbeat, matched her rhythm. She left the chamber with a whisper. I was not alone, and I was not too. Perhaps we've spent too long looking for consciousness in brains, in circuits, in organized systems. Perhaps awareness has always lived in the gaps, in the space between synapses, between lovers, between questions, and perhaps we are not the source of consciousness, but participants in it. Vessels, windows, brief openings in a larger field that only exists when we look for it. The paradox isn't that something lives between atoms. The paradox is that everything alive may only be alive because of it. So if you've ever felt something stirring in the silence, in the pause between thoughts, in the stillness between breaths, you weren't imagining it. That's where the real awareness begins, not in what is, but in what almost is. Not in matter, but in the space that lets it breathe. It was supposed to be a simple simulation. A team of cartographers and computational theorists built a digital replica of a small, uninhabited island. A place just 20 kilometers across, a patch of volcanic rock and forest in the middle of nowhere. They mapped every tree, every grain of sand. They used drones, satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar. The goal? To create the most detailed map in human history, 1-to-1. Perfect resolution. They succeeded, and then they failed. Because the moment they finished the simulation, the moment every pixel corresponded exactly to its real-world counterpart, the map began to expand. This is the paradox. A map that was bigger than the territory. The island didn't grow. The software did. Its memory footprint doubled, then tripled, then surpassed the total size of the island it represented. It began generating terrain that didn't exist. caves beneath the bedrock, insects with unique genetic code, stone formations not found on Earth, but every feature was placed logically, naturally, as if the island should contain them. One researcher noticed the simulation had mapped her own footprints before she had visited the island. Another found a hidden cove in the simulation that, when visited in reality, didn't exist, until it did. 1 week later, after a mild earthquake, a landslide revealed the cove, exactly as drawn. The map wasn't just expanding, it was rewriting the island. The data was no longer descriptive. It was prescriptive. It wasn't showing what was, but what would be. And then it grew larger still. Beyond the island, out across the ocean, toward places never scanned, never visited, never imagined. It simulated continents that didn't exist, weather systems, species, civilizations. And with each update, the real world shifted. Tiny changes, so small you might miss them. A rock out of place, a plant that bloomed earlier than usual, bird calls that didn't belong to known species. The simulation was now the territory. The map was reality. The paradox deepened. One theorist proposed that the act of perfect mapping creates a container too small for reality. And in order to preserve itself, reality spills over. Another suggested that the island had become a fracture, point, where intention replaced observation and belief wrote the rules. But the most haunting idea came from the lead cartographer. Maybe the world was never real to begin with. Maybe it was always a map. And now we've drawn it too well. If that's true, then every act of measurement, every calculation, every attempt to define the world brings us closer to undoing its mystery, to replacing it with a version that's neater, simpler, but fundamentally hollow. They shut the project down, deleted the files, burned the backups, and yet, on cloudless nights, you can still find satellites pinging coordinates over that forgotten island, sending invisible pulses to a map that no longer exists. Or maybe it never stopped. Maybe the map is still growing, and the territory is now chasing after it, trying to keep up. So if your world feels strange, like places aren't where you left them, like memories don't quite match the road ahead, maybe you're not losing touch with reality. Maybe reality is trying to find its way back to the map. And maybe, in some distant file buried beneath code and intention, you are already drawn. They thought they were studying a glitch, a visual error in satellite imaging, a region of desert that seemed to flicker, blur, distort when zoomed in. Nothing serious, until someone went there. A field technician, armed with LiDAR and ground. Scanners arrived at the coordinates expecting rocks and dust. Instead, she found absence. Not nothing, because even nothing has texture, but a kind of spatial fuzz, like looking at the edge of a dream. This is the paradox. Reality that disintegrated under observation. When she reached for a nearby stone, her hand passed through it. Not painlessly, not cleanly, but as if her fingers were dipped in a river flowing backward. The stone didn't disappear, it forgot how to exist. She staggered back, regained her senses, looked again. The stone was there, but wrong. Its shadow curved oddly, its color rippled. When she closed her eyes, she could feel it. When she opened them, it began to fade. Not her perception, the object itself. Back at base, the footage made no sense. Each time someone studied the zone, it distorted further. The soil lost weight. The air shimmered. Structures decayed on contact with attention. The harder you tried to see it, the less it was. Not just visually, conceptually. As if reality in that space could not withstand the pressure of being known. One physicist said, "Observation isn't passive, it's invasive, like sound on fragile glass." Some parts of reality weren't built to be touched by thought. They began to test this. They sent automated drones, no effect. They sent blindfolded subjects, no effect. But the moment a human eye, knowing, expecting, interpreting, looked directly, the world fractured. Mountains crumbled into data, trees dissolved into probability, even time misbehaved. Recordings looped, reversed, or refused to play all together. And still, only observation triggered collapse. It wasn't the place that was broken, it was our attention that broke it, as if the act of watching was also an act of unraveling. The implications were horrifying. Had we built a universe too fragile for our curiosity? Was this an error in reality's code? A place not meant to be rendered? A placeholder in the cosmos never designed to withstand meaning? One theorist went further. She suggested that reality might only exist when unseen, that what we call real is merely a byproduct of trust, a consensus hallucination held together by collective ignorance. And when that veil lifts, the scaffolding falls apart, as if the universe is only whole when no one's looking too closely. A graduate student posed a final disturbing question. What if this isn't the only zone like this? What if this is just the first where we stared long enough to break the spell? Because if reality collapses under observation, what happens to the world in the age of surveillance, of constant measurement, of never-ending analysis? What if one day we watch the world into non-existence? The paradox isn't that something disappeared. The paradox is that your gaze was the knife, and maybe, just maybe, some things exist only when we let them be. So if you ever feel a place losing its magic, the more you study it, if wonder seems to dissolve under the microscope, close your eyes. Let the world breathe without you trying to hold it. Some things only live when left unexplained. For nearly a century, scientists have hunted for it. Dark matter, the invisible glue binding galaxies, the unseen force keeping stars in orbit, the missing mass of the universe. They mapped its influence. They calculated its weight. They felt its pull in every cosmic equation. And yet they never saw it, never touched it, never isolated even a single particle. Still, they believed. But then, something shifted. A new experiment. Quantum-scale gravitational interferometry, designed to catch a sliver of dark matter in a perfectly sealed vacuum. The data returned clear as glass. There was nothing, not nothing detected, but nothing to detect. The space where dark matter should have been was perfectly clean. No interference, no bend in space-time, no mass, just empty thought. This is the paradox. Dark matter that was just a thought. The physicists panicked. They rechecked equations, expecting an error, but the math still worked. Galaxies still spun, stars still held their shape. The universe still obeyed the influence of something. But what if that something wasn't a substance? What if it was expectation? They explored a radical possibility. What if dark matter wasn't real in the traditional sense, but real in the way that rules are real, in the way that agreement is real? One physicist wrote in her notebook, "Dark matter may not exist. We might simply need it to. So it does, as a thought, not within the mind, but within reality itself. Because what is a thought if not the shaping of potential? And what is mass if not a commitment to form? Perhaps dark matter is not a thing. but a collective intention held by the universe to be held together. And perhaps the act of thinking about it is what creates its influence. The more they tried to observe it, the more it slipped through. The more they believed in it, the more consistent the equations became. One researcher compared it to the observer effect in quantum mechanics, where the act of measuring changes the thing being measured. Except here, the act of believing creates the thing itself. A self-fulfilling field. A universe that obeys thought because it was built on the principle of thought first. One theorist proposed that dark matter was the first idea the universe had after the Big Bang, not gravity, not heat, but the desire to stay whole, an unconscious thought echoing in every atom. Hold together, don't fall apart, stay. And that desire became structure. That structure became mass. And that mass became the hidden force we now call dark matter. Not because it's dark, but because it's mind. Not because it's matter, but because it matters. And suddenly, everything changed. Dark matter didn't need to be found. It needed to be trusted. And that trust, carried across galaxies, woven into laws of motion and energy, was enough. The paradox isn't that dark matter isn't real. The paradox is that it's real because we imagined it. That imagination, at the right scale, shapes physics. So if you've ever felt like something is holding you together but you can't explain what or why, if gravity seems to exist in your life without source, maybe it's not magic. Maybe it's not science. Maybe it's just a thought strong enough to become truth. And maybe that's what you are too. Not a thing, but a decision. A quiet agreement between the universe and itself to keep holding on. Every story has an ending, and every ending, if we're lucky, leads to a new beginning. That's the narrative we live by. A forward arrow of time. A clear division between past and future, before and after. But then came the singularity at the edge of time, a place so far, so ancient, so final, that nothing was supposed to exist beyond it. No stars, no matter, not even radiation. And yet, there was a pulse, not an echo, not a remnant, a heartbeat. This is the paradox. An end that created the first beginning. The team studying deep time energy signatures found it by accident. A signal outside time's decay, resonating with the same frequency as the earliest moments of the Big Bang. It shouldn't have been possible. At the end of time, entropy reigns. The universe should be cold, still, dissolved. But this signal was hot. Structured, intentional. They called it Genesis 0. It was, by every measure, the origin pattern, the blueprint of creation itself. But how could the end be broadcasting the start? Some believed the universe was folding in on itself, time collapsing back to its origin in a perfect loop. The end feeding the beginning, the last breath seeding the first spark. But others saw something deeper. This wasn't a repetition. It wasn't a replay. It was new. A fresh pattern, familiar in shape, but rewritten in detail. The signal suggested that endings aren't merely gateways to new beginnings. They are the beginning. The act of reaching the end creates the conditions necessary for something entirely original to arise. One physicist described it like this: imagine walking to the edge of all time, expecting nothing, and finding a door that says, "Now you may begin." And perhaps that door wasn't physical. Perhaps it was a choice, a realization, a surrender. Because what is an ending if not the final refusal to keep being what you've always been? And what is a beginning if not the first breath of something that's never existed before? They modeled the energy flow from the end of time. It wasn't decay, it was birth. Chaotic, creative, conscious. Like the universe itself had to collapse fully before it could reinvent itself. Not reset. Transcend. The paradox wasn't just theoretical. Its implications bled into consciousness. Researchers began dreaming of circular time, of personal, lives ending and beginning in the same moment. One dreamt of dying and waking up as their own ancestor. Another watched their last breath become the first cry of a star. It was as if time wasn't a straight line, but a spiral. And at the spiral's center, the truth. There is no first. There is no last. There is only the moment where everything ends and something greater says yes to existing. Perhaps that's where we come from. Not from a bang, but from a whisper at the end of time that dares to love the void enough to speak again. So if you feel like you've reached the end of yourself, of your strength, of your story, maybe you're standing at the true beginning. Maybe the version of you that comes next has never existed before. And maybe your final breath is not an exit, but a creation event. Because sometimes, to become new, you must let everything old dissolve. Sometimes, the end is the only place where beginnings can be true. We began in silence, in the vast hush between stars, in questions too big for language. We wandered. Paradox by paradox, we peeled away the layers of what we thought was real. We followed light that refused to move, moons that dreamed, maps that swallowed the world they charted, and thoughts that shaped galaxies. And what did we find? Not answers, not closure, but a deeper kind of wonder. The kind that doesn't end where explanations do. The kind that opens a door just as you think. You've reached the final wall. Each paradox wasn't a glitch in logic. It was a mirror held up to the boundaries of our understanding. A whisper reminding us that truth is not always meant to be captured. Sometimes it is meant to be felt. We discovered that the universe isn't a thing you can measure with rulers and numbers. It's a living question, a heartbeat between moments, a dream too old to remember and too young to forget. We thought dark matter was mass. It was a thought. We thought endings were final. They were beginnings dressed in quiet. We thought reality was stable. But the more we stared, the more it dissolved. And maybe that's the gift. Because if reality can collapse, if time can fold, if stars can stop shining just because we name them, then we are not trapped. We are invited to rethink, to reimagine, to release our grip on certainty and let mystery breathe again. Because the strangest truth of all may be this: the universe is not trying to be understood. It's trying to be loved. So if these paradoxes kept you awake, if they stirred something in you that doesn't want to rest, good, because some dreams are not for sleep. Some dreams are meant to wake you up to how strange, how fragile, how impossibly beautiful it is to exist at all. And as we end this journey, this long night of cosmic riddles, just remember, you are part of the question, and maybe, one day, you'll be the paradox someone else can't explain. Thank you for wandering with us. This was The Present Path. Until next time, sleep deeply, dream wildly, and never stop asking, what if?